Are we on? Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Greetings.
The audience here and everyone out there in the web world of cyberspace. Welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. So if we had a real production here, there'd be signs going up now. Everybody applaud and laugh. No, sorry. There's no signs. Okay? Now I shall do my 3-minute stand-up, and then we will get into serious business. So I welcome you all. I hope you had a very pleasant holiday, Shavuot. Those that don't know what Shavuot was, I hope it was pleasant as well. So, being that yesterday and 2 days ago, Monday and Tuesday, was a special holiday where we celebrated and honored 3,320 years since the Jews stood at Sinai and received the mandate that brought civilization to the world. Did you know that? 3,320 years?
Nobody told me until now.
Okay, now you know. Good. For those that don't know who you just heard, this is a voice from the past and also a voice of the future.
The present and the future.
Right. This may be your moment. The world is watching.
Never know.
Right.
Never know.
So, being that it was a special holiday that has many messages to us, and perhaps the greatest one of all is the fusion of spirit and matter. As the Medrash says, a fascinating statement, that up to the point of Sinai, that the great contribution of Sinai was not just that the Torah was given, a Torah of laws and rituals and guidelines and mitzvot, but also a much greater thing happened. A cosmic event took place. And that event was that up to that point, matter and energy were two separate worlds. At Sinai, in the words of the Medrash, that before Sinai, that which was above, Elyonim lo yardu lamata, that which was above did not descend below. V'tachtenim lo yalu lamala, and that which was below did not elevate, ascend above. Which in other words means the spiritual, the sublime, was relegated to the sublime, the material and the mundane was relegated to the mundane, and these two met sporadically, but they could not really fuse, not join. As it says in one of the verses, Hashemayim laHashem, the heaven is to God, and the earth was given to human beings, which is also a driving force in many philosophies, that God belongs in a different realm. If you want to be a human being on this earth, you play by different rules. Spirit and matter, energy and matter did not fuse. In modern lingo, form and function, body and soul, the outer and the inner, the packaging and that which was inside the package were two separate worlds. At Sinai, as the Medrash continues, Elyonim yardu lamata, that which was above came down, and that which was below elevated, and the two worlds met. It was essentially, as the poets would put it, the marriage, the kiss of heaven and earth. Something that every romantic, every philosopher, every transcendental human being searching for some form of transcendence has always aspired to. Can these two worlds meet? Can we, mortals, in a material world where we need to eat and sleep and we have other obligations, and we're distracted by greed, by ego, by vanity, by pettiness, a world of abuse, a world where people can be cruel to each other, is it possible that this world can actually touch heaven, and can heaven touch this place? That's why the Sinai event was such an unprecedented and historical episode, because actually it made the statement that they actually can join. And you don't have to leave this earth. In other words, you don't have to be an ascetic. You don't have to live an ascetic lifestyle, escaping from the day-to-day affairs of life to connect to the divine. How's that?
Amen.
That's my stand-up piece, okay? Wasn't so funny, right? I know.
Yeah.
So the kiss of heaven and earth, marrying energy and matter. As I mentioned when I was at Riverdale, Shavuot, Einstein stood at Mount Sinai. He's one of the Jews that stood there. Albert Einstein. So perhaps his soul heard 3,320 years ago something that when he became a patent clerk emerged into the theories that ultimately led to E equals mc squared, which is essentially the Sinai event, fusion of matter and spirit, that matter and energy are not two entities, but they're actually reversible. Matter is just another form of energy. So, you heard it here first. Einstein heard it at Sinai. How do you like that?
I trust you.
Good, very good. So in the spirit of this event, being that we're a day after Shavuot, it's called Isur Chag, it's still bound to the holiday. And generally the 7 days after a holiday have somewhat of a connection called Tashlumin. They like in a sense are the after effect, the after echo of the holiday. So the holiday spirit still remains with us. So we decided that the topic tonight will be no, the topic will be what happens after heaven is lost, or something like that. I wrote the topic, but the topic basically is what happens when heaven is closed. Because one can suggest that the experience that happened at Sinai was a one-time event, and it was special, and it's like any type of magical event in our lives that comes and goes. The real challenge is not how do you make contact, it's how do you maintain contact. That's why maintenance contracts are much more expensive than initial purchase. So it's one thing to get inspired.
Where did heaven go?
Where did heaven go is the exact title. Where did heaven go? You know, one of the saddest things in life, and I'm sure all of us can identify with it, is shattered dreams. Is anyone here or anyone on earth that has not had certain expectations, promises that were broken, expectations that weren't realized, dreams that were shattered, a love that was lost? One of the saddest things in the existential loneliness of existence, of our experience, is that sadness that comes when something you so much believed in, you're like touched by heaven, kissed by heaven, and you experience something magical, something unique that was in your mind, in your heart, absolutely special. And then it disappears, it dissipates. That's one of the saddest experiences in life. You know, time passes, so perhaps with time sometimes the pain goes away, but it's not difficult to recreate the moment, because it was something that was special. You don't forget that quickly. Often what is even sadder that happens is we become resigned, and we almost don't want to hope that something else can come our way, because we were hurt the first time. You don't want to be hurt again. So in the general context of what we call existential loneliness, which means that after everything is said and done, no matter how many friends we have and how much love we have in our lives, which is also not to be taken for granted in this world, still, even when you have all that, at the end of the day we all walk home alone. There's a part of us that always remains somewhat alone. But it gets much more complicated and much more problematic, much more troublesome, much more complex when, as I said, there's a broken dream, a shattered dream, a broken promise, a love that you thought would be, that was it, and it ended up not being it. And then you start thinking to yourself, was it all an illusion? Maybe it wasn't real in the first place. Sometimes our defense mechanisms need to convince ourselves it was an illusion, because it may be too much to take if you thought it was really real. Because then what do you do then? And if it was real, what happened? Are you to blame? Is the other person to blame? And obviously I'm not just talking only about love per se, loving someone you thought you loved, and you thought they loved you. This is true. It can be about a spiritual experience, it could be about a magical experience, it could be anything that touches us in the deepest place. So if anyone doesn't identify with this idea, if you don't mind raising your hand so I'll know that I'm dealing with an angel, I guess. You don't have to go into details, but the fact is, there's no one that's immune from this experience, which in a way, I don't know if that's a consolation, but it's definitely we need to know this is part of the human experience. And what's even more fascinating, that there are lessons from Sinai that can teach us a lot about those shattered dreams, those unrealized hopes, promises, potential. So the first thing that has to be stated is that it all comes really down to what a human being is capable of. The pain of a lost love, for instance, is very profound, and it brings out the best in us, and it could also bring out the worst in us, because we all have a part of us that is very insecure. How could you not be insecure in a world that is driven by commodities? Just the sheer fact that we need money to survive itself develops insecurity, which is why they call it securities. Not that it gives you any security, but they try to sell you security. Why does it create insecurity? Because money, by its nature, its very nature, inherent to money, is that it's not immortal. It doesn't last forever. If it did, we wouldn't be pursuing it. Then you have it and you keep it. Because it is temporary, which means once you spend it, you don't have the money you spent. Once you invest and you lose something, or you in any other way money diminishes, that in itself creates that insecurity. That's why you find people who may be billionaires and they haven't become more secure. On the contrary, there's an expression, oyev kesef le'yizba kesef, that someone who's in love with money can never be satisfied with as much money as they have, because then they need more money to protect the earlier money. It's like an insurance policy. You need an insurance policy to protect your first insurance policy. You need guards to protect you that your first guard shouldn't rip you off. So, mar b'nechasim, mar b'daige. The more you acquire, the more anxiety. There's by no means a suggestion. Judaism and the Torah does not teach that poverty is a virtue and wealth is a vice. Wealth is considered a blessing. It's a gift. But only when you don't worship it. If it's an end in itself, it will become a vice. Take a study, a simple study, any type of study. You don't need to be scientific about it. Look at families where there's wealth acquired. Say the father built a great fortune. He worked hard, he built a fortune. Took care of his children. What usually happens in a family like that? Statistically, over 95% chance that within 3 generations or 2 generations, that family will be destroyed by the money that they acquired. Either a major war will break out between the children or grandchildren, or the father will so emasculate the children and the money will become such a powerful thing that will destroy them psychologically. Or people who have not earned the money, meaning the children and grandchildren, will waste it because they didn't earn it. It's very easy for them to blow the money. It's the rare instances where you see fortunes last generations. And you have to say it's admirable because someone must have done something right. It's not just because wise investments were made. It's because the original patriarch who made the money probably built in his will all kinds of guidelines and checks and balances to ensure that the money should not destroy his family. Now, of course, every one of us would say, give us that challenge, right? And we will do better. But if you really knew that wealth would come your way, a 95% chance it would destroy your children and grandchildren, how many people would say it's worth it? Sadly, many would say it's worth it. Because number one is they don't believe. They'll just say, I don't believe it's going to hurt my children. They'll deny that. Or number two is, the fact is, they don't think so much about their children as much as they think about themselves. Parents can abuse their children. There's a statement in the Bible that I always read, was always very disturbing. You could think it's like almost horrendous. The Bible has a section that is very negative. We call the curses, the klalot. And truth is, they're not really curses, but literally when you read them, it says that when you'll follow my guidelines, God says, here's how you will be blessed. And then it says in certain chapters, and when we read them in the synagogues on Shabbat, actually these chapters are read in a lower tone, and no one gets an aliyah with these chapters, and because it has a certain negative connotations. Even though it's a famous story that I've shared here once, that there was a Rebbe, just as a tangential story, that when he was a young man, one week they were reading this parsha, Saveh, Kasha Ki Saveh. It's read in the end of the summer. the United States, meaning the end of the winter in the other hemisphere like Australia. And he suddenly fainted when he was revived. They asked him, "What did you faint?" He said, "When I heard what it says in the Torah, it was too shocking for me." They said to him, "But you heard the Torah last year too, the same chapter you heard last year and 2 years ago, you didn't faint then." And he said, "Well, my father read the Torah those years. This year's father had to travel, someone else read it." He says, "When my father reads, I only heard blessings." So it's also how you read. It's like, there are two ways you can discipline someone. Someone that's a gvoradika person, a cruel person, when they discipline someone, it doesn't taste good. A loving person, even when they discipline you, you may not like it, but it has a certain tinge of love to it. So to go back to the verse says that you shall not, if you do not follow my ways, God says, mothers will eat their own children. They will be so hungry, there will be such a famine, that they will eat the children from their own womb. It's a statement. And the Torah doesn't mince words. It's not one of these books that just come to make you feel good. It talks reality. And I always thought, what does this mean? Which mother would consume her own children? This is when I was younger. Then as I grew a little older, and I began giving this class, and I started meeting people who grew up in horrendous environments in their own home. And I saw with my own eyes children that were consumed by their mothers. Not necessarily physically. She didn't eat their flesh, she ate their soul. Through her own insecurities, through her own neurosis. Well, maybe mothers get too much of a bad rap today. Like those three grandmothers that were on the Miami Beach, all comparing notes about how great their children were. So one woman says, "When my 80th birthday, my son, he brought the whole family down for a week and they spent time with him." Woman number two, grandmother number two says, "My son, that's nothing. He took us all for a safari a month in Africa, and that was the celebration of my 80th birthday." And the third woman says, she looks at them like a good Jewish woman, she says, "You don't know what a son is. You want a son? My son is a high-powered attorney in New York City. He goes to therapy 4 times a week, and he pays top dollar. And the only thing he talks about is me. That's a son." Okay. So, and didn't have to wait for her 80th birthday for that either. So mothers get, perhaps sometimes it's overdone, but on the other hand, I have seen both mothers and fathers in the most abusive situations that I could not believe it, because growing up in my home, a relatively healthy home, I've seen other healthy homes, it's hard to imagine how unhealthy a parent can be. So that verse in the Torah is quite a powerful one, and unfortunately in this dysfunctional age you see it quite often. As a matter of fact, prosperity and wealth usually causes more abuse than does oppression and poverty, because you're running for your life. And everybody, your ideals are crystallized. You don't have time and leisure and boredom on your hands to allow the worst of human nature to emerge. So, to go back to what I was saying here, is that that we live in a world where we have a lot of pain, where we have a lot of the losses, a lot of the challenges in life. Excuse me. Just say l'chaim. And to go back to the initial theme, that many of us feel that we may have lost heaven. So as I was saying, each of us has many reasons to be insecure in this world. Money is just one of them. But the general life that we live, where people worship looks, youth, buying power, performance, as they like to put it, that in itself, just the worship of those elements, which are all, just like with money, they're all neutral on their own. If they're not an extreme and you don't worship them as an end in itself, that's all very healthy. But when it becomes the sole search, the sole measure of success, the sole barometer of success, they become very destructive. Why? Because they're all temporary forces. No one remains young forever. Looks change. Your performance is not going to be steady. There's ups and downs. And the same with our buying power. With almost anything that we consider to be status is all changeable. So it's built in that it has to develop insecurity, because if you're worshiping that, then you're basically worshiping something that doesn't have anything permanent about it. So how do you expect, using a simple mathematical equation, to stand on something that's impermanent and expect to feel secure? So even though this makes so much sense, I guarantee you that no matter who hears this, it will not change their attitude. So explain that bizarre part of human nature. Explain it. Because we are sometimes our own worst enemy. That's what it is. We're blind. You can hear a truth and not abide by it. Your mind can tell you you're about to do the wrong thing and you still do it. How's that possible? So the Arizal, the great Arizal, explained it with the great symptom. That God in his perhaps ultimate act of vengeance, I wouldn't say no, God forbid, his ultimate act of creation concealed the truth or concealed the divine presence from our eyes. So what you see is not what you get. In other words, you may understand truth, but it's not necessarily something that you're going to pursue. That takes a lot of work, because between that truth and the world at which we live, there's some type of, almost like an invisible barrier that doesn't let you see. Blake called it the doors of perception, which gave birth to a group called the Doors. And they attempted in their own anarchistic way to access that reality. And we know many who burned out trying, whether it was through inducing it through LSD or other drugs. You have some of the great geniuses in the late 60s, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, etc., etc. And then many others that may not have killed themselves and overdosed, but they killed their spirits even though they remained alive, like Miles Davis and so on. I'm using these examples simply because they're contemporary ones. But don't think that it's exclusive to them. In the Torah there's also mention made of such experiences. Lahavdil, one would probably say, that Nadav and Avihu, when they walked into the temple, the first day that it opened up in the sanctuary, they also ran in with ecstasy, not the drug. They ran in with ecstasy of their heart and their souls, and they got burned out. The Torah says that they were consumed by a strange fire.
Ecstasy.
Strange fire.
That was.
Yeah. A strange fire. Why? Because spiritual high, when you try to find what is behind the curtain, if you're not ready for it, it could be equally destructive. So we have this almost like catch-22 situation. If you try to access the truth, you can be burned by it. If you remain where you are, you remain somewhat disconnected from it. Which is why one of the Chassidim said, the last day of his life, and they asked him, what do you look forward to as you leave this earth? He says, I look forward to one day that I will not lie to myself. And this was a chassid that was aware that he lies to himself, and that's what he said. Imagine the rest of us would think we're so truthful and sincere. Now this doesn't mean we don't have sincerity within us, and doesn't mean we are not capable of unbelievable acts of nobility and majesty. You see it all the time. But we also have to be aware we have another side to us. So it's almost like two voices. So when you talk about shattered dream, you talk about a love lost, really have to analyze is who we are before we get into the area of meeting heaven and earth kissing. What happens when we lose something that we believe in? The key thing that happens is not the loss itself, is that you begin to look at yourself in a different way. You lose confidence. You'll see some of the greatest artists, or athletes for that matter, anyone that's mastered a true art, you want to really see their greatness, look at the times when they are losing, or when it's not working. Whether it's in a tennis match, or it's in a moment when they have a block. Well, the key thing that is admirable when you see people like that is that they have something inside of them that can rebuild their confidence, because it's so easy for it to begin to unravel. Because let's say you come up with a whole plan. Many chess matches, which are very psychological, you see this all the time. You come up with a whole plan, and this is true across the board. This can be in any area. It can be in a business plan. It can be in sports. It can be in art. It can be in writing. You come up with a plan, and being someone that's experienced, you think you have a good plan, but then something unexpected happens. your opponent is much better than you expected, or they came up with a plan that surprises you, or you're not on your right day. Sometimes you're just not doing well. What's the first thing that happens? You start losing confidence in yourself, and as you lose confidence, you get weaker, and you get weaker, especially with a good opponent. They will see that, and at some point it just unravels, and you have nowhere to go. Last week in the news was what was his name? Big Brown, the horse, right? So, as I read about it, the thing that struck me was, not that I follow horse racing, trust me.
Can't avoid this one.
But they were giving him steroids.
Yeah, I was going to say something.
Okay, so the jockey wisely understood that he's just not running, so that was it. He wasn't going to try to force it.
So sad.
Maybe it was more.
They were giving the horse steroids.
Okay, and then what he got? And then what happened?
After
For the preakness, they
the
didn't give
therapy.
Belmont Stakes, they didn't give him. So they didn't win. Lost.
So why don't they call this the horse to a congressional hearing in the steroid committee or whatever they call it?
He can't speak. He's not allowed.
Okay. Okay, I'm not going. This is not the discussion about the horse racing. I meant it simply as a pure analogy to what I was saying here. So let's not get distracted. Who'd you bet on? So the point I'm trying to say is that that excellence, you see excellence of those that are able to rebuild the confidence, even when things are very, very weak. The Jewish people are probably the ultimate example. They've been in a horse race longer than all these races, 3,320 years to be exact, if not longer, from Abraham's times. And when you see the excellence shine, look, after every tragedy, 6 million Jews were killed 60 years ago. What happened afterwards? The most optimistic person would never have written the script that occurred in the last 60 years. Impossible to describe it. Everyone immediately wrote obituaries. It was sad. Remember, it wasn't just 6 million. It was 6 million from the roots of the greatest, the scholars, the rabbis, the teachers. Basically the heart and soul and engine of Jewish life in Europe. In America, as Judaism was on the wane, it was turning into complete assimilation. We won't go into the fact that many so-called more secular or assimilated Jews were not that saddened by the fact that so-called the old shtetl was gone. It's a sore point to discuss, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But the point being is, everyone wrote their obituaries. And this is not the first time. And the pogroms at the end of the 19th century, and before that the Inquisition. The Spanish expulsion in 1492 was the same thing. Spain was the golden era of Spain, the center of Jewish life, of scholarship. Not there weren't Jews in other countries, but the greatest leaders were in Spain. How could a nation survive after completely expelled? You think about it, it's not one person expelled, a whole nation. Completely displaced. No homes, no money, no language. And you see in each situation, that's where greatness is shown. Where did it come from? People still don't know. Even Jews don't really know the secret of their own survival. The answer in one word is, as we say in the Haggadah on Passover, which we said a little over 50 days ago, 52 days ago to be exact, we say, V'hi sha'am delanu. It's almost a cryptic statement. V'hi, she stood for us, or withstood all. And the prayer continues. That Afal Pid, even though in each generation, B'chol dar v'dar, they came to exterminate us, still we withstood it all. What's the he? The he. He is in the feminine, she. It doesn't even say what. You could even say he means the feminine spirit within the Jewish people. And happens to be true. I'll explain that in a moment. So some say that he goes on the faith, Amunah. The faith withstood all. Some say it's the promise that God gave, the Haftacha. They're all in the feminine, Haftacha, Amunah. But it was definitely something that was stronger than the events of the moment. As I said earlier, just like impermanent things can't give you security, obviously the converse is true. Only permanent things can give you eternity. And it's the faith that withstood it all, that faith that withstood all the ups and downs, the vicissitudes, the turbulence of life. And why is it in the feminine? So I'll share with you, in the Bible it says, in the book of Exodus, it says this, that King Pharaoh, who was intent on keeping the Jews enslaved, oppressed, it was a genocide basically, and it was the entire Jewish people, not just 6 million, it was everyone, because they all lived under Egyptian rule. So he heard from his stargazers that a man will rise, a boy will be born, and he will rise and turn into a man, referring to Moses, who will lead the Jews out of Egypt. So they had the right, the prescience, they foresaw. So he was a smart aleck. So he preempted, he says, okay, if that's the case, we shall decree that all Jewish boys, all males, should be thrown into the river Nile. That way this boy will never grow into become a man. Sounds like an airtight plan. What happened by the Jews? So the men said to their wives, listen, this is a tragedy, a terrible decree, and we think we should abstain from having children until this decree is over, because he's going to kill all our boys. Not that they didn't love their daughters, but it was to be a tragedy of unprecedented proportions. And the women said to their husbands, we were promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that we will be redeemed from this God-forsaken place. If we don't have children, who's going to leave this place? We're going to all die here. Interesting. The men thought about the moment, the women thought the long-term picture. And of course the women prevailed. I say of course for many reasons. You can figure that out yourself. And they had children. And the Talmud says that the women, when it came time to give birth, the Egyptians of course would come around looking for these boys, new Jewish males. So the Talmud is an elaborate story how some women went to the fields and they gave birth there, and a miracle took place and God took care of those children until they were ready to be retrieved. And of course the main story, Yocheved, the mother of Moses, took her son. Aaron was born before the decree, just for the in case you're wondering. Moses, she took her little Moses and bundled him into a little basket, which she smeared with tar, so it should float and be waterproof. And she put him at the edge of the river Nile. And she sent her daughter Miriam to watch over Moses. And there's a lot to be said just of Miriam watching over Moses. The Talmud says for those few hours that she watched Moses, she was rewarded with great rewards. The care she took to watch over her little brother. And of course the story continues. Pharaoh's daughter goes to bathe. She hears a child. She reaches out, brings him. And as a matter of fact, Moses is called Moses, Moshe, not his original name that was given to him by his parents. Moses, because Minamaya Mishisihu, because the daughter of Pharaoh said, I drew him from water. Moshe Mishisihu, I drew him, this boy, from water. That became his name, the name we all know him by, Moshe.
But did he have another name?
Yes. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. The different opinions with the other name was okay. So the women did prevail, and Moses did make it through. Were some boys killed? Yes, there were many killed. But it's the women's faith and the women's connection that they didn't give up that allowed Moses to rise. Had Yocheved listened to Amram, her husband, Moses would never have been born. And where would we be today? That would be a good question. Now, what is it that Pharaoh didn't understand? And this is the secret to Jewish survival, and we're going to go back to the theme of this evening with is heaven lost? What Pharaoh didn't understand, which is what, thank God, all anti-Semites don't understand, and even Semites barely understand, that is that the power of the Jewish people does not lie in the way they think power is. What is power? So Pharaoh thought, power? Power is a great army. Power are the men who can bear arms. They're physically stronger than the women. They can subdue the women and the children. Power is an empire. It's money. It's whatever gives you the ability to conquer and vanquish and dominate over others. That's what power is. That's the definition of power. So what did he think to himself? Who's going to challenge the great Egyptian empire? It will be the men who are physically brute strength. They have power. They may rise up in an army to challenge us. You kill all the men, the women and children could be taken care of. They can't challenge us. Why was it a blessing? Because the enemy measures power by what he thinks is power. And he missed under the radar the main power. He didn't understand the power of faith. He didn't understand that the power of belief in a promise was more powerful than all his armies. And today, we sit here today and can speak about those men and women, especially the women. Because the Talmud says that b'schus, in the honor of the righteous women of the time the Jews were redeemed from Egypt, we can speak about them as their children. We know where they walked, we know their names, we know how long they lived, we know they're buried. And the Egyptians don't have any children or descendants to talk about what happened. The Egyptians today are not the Egyptians from then. No one even claims to say I'm a grandson of Pharaoh. You know, if someone can prove it, you can make a lot of money. Like remember after the Tsarist Russia, there were all kinds of claims that this one was a child of Nicholas and Alexandra, this one was this child, that child. You know, royal blood. Anybody that you know is claiming to be Pharaoh's blue blood.
That came with that claim to be the Nicholas descendants.
Okay, Nicholas descendants, but not Pharaoh's. Doesn't go back so far. So what happened with this great Egyptian army? You have now, it's a tourist site in Egypt. You see some of the relics, some of the past. Yeah, it's great to watch, it's great to observe, but it's not a way of life. No children and grandchildren were left that follow a path of virtue. And it was the woman, that's why Vehisha Amdalanu, the feminine, withstood it all. Is the feminine energy that is able to understand that it's not brute strength that determines the course of history. Do we live in a male-dominated society today? Yes, in many ways. And do we live in women who are trying to be like men? Absolutely. They're trying to play by the rules that the men wrote, which is that power lies in aggression. Power lies in dominance, in how much you acquire. But the true energy, as we say in the Eshes Chayil, which is the subtle energy that lasts, not that's temporarily powerful for the moment, not like sugar-coated power. That lies in the domain of the feminine. And feminine here obviously goes far beyond just a woman per se as opposed to a man. We all have feminine energy, including men. The Kabbalah talks about the feminine dimension of God and the masculine dimension. We say the Shekhinah is the feminine dimension. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the masculine dimension. Both are necessary, which is why soulmates bring both strengths together. But it's the feminine energy that has much more recognition and appreciation of the subtlety of eternity. Eternity is never glamorous. Foundations of buildings are not visible to the eye. They don't even look that good if you ever saw a real foundation. Most of us don't see the building above the foundation. There was a woman who wrote to one of the Rebbes that people come, they have guests at home Friday night, and people compliment her husband for his erudite presentations, his teachings, he's a scholar and so on. And they really give her a compliment, or they compliment other things that the man does. So the Rebbe responded to her and said, you see, when people come into a house, you ever hear anyone say, you always hear people say, oh, what a beautiful chandelier, what a beautiful couch, what a beautiful bookcase, what a beautiful cutlery. Anyone ever say, what a beautiful foundation that this whole building is resting on, because the whole building wouldn't stand if there was no foundation? Now, this is not a justification that we shouldn't compliment. It was just to point out that we worship the superficial. We worship that which we see with our eyes, that which gives us strength for the moment. That is the blindness of human beings. And even when you know this, instant gratification still will always be more dominant in most cases than the permanent. That's how it is. That's the way God created the world, where I said there's a curtain that separates the two. So to go back now to our own selves. So you had a love that you thought this was the love of your life. You had a dream that you thought this would be fulfilled. A promise was made to you by someone you trusted. A potential that you saw that was as real as it gets. And in all cases, the dream was shattered, the promise broken, the expectations not met, the love lost. What does it all do to the human psyche? It feeds into that voice inside of us, which is the insecure voice. And it's very hard then to hold on to anything. So what happens is, as I said earlier, once you lose confidence, then it starts unraveling. It becomes a vicious cycle. And you lose more confidence and more. And at some point, you don't want to try again. What's the story of Sinai? That's what happened at Sinai. Heaven met earth. It was an unbelievable experience. But then, the day passed. The world was changed forever. The Jews all knew that. They knew that from here on, matter and energy converge, which was unprecedented, something that was not possible before. But to the physical eye, they didn't see it. You look at the world right now, you don't see necessarily that you can turn matter into energy. You still need to study it, you still need to hold on to that. Yes, we could look through history and say the Jewish people are an example of survival under the worst circumstances. So it can be an inspiration. You know, if someone said it to you 4,000 years ago, be like an Abraham, that would be almost impossible. Because Abraham didn't know what was coming. What we see the history, we've seen people who've held on to faith have survived. It's undeniable. And still it's difficult to hold on. It just makes you wonder what these people had like Moses and Abraham. Well, how did they know? They didn't have a precedent. They couldn't say, well, for 1,000 years we've been holding on. They didn't have those type of experiences. There you have to say that their indomitable spirit was just simply so powerful that nothing could faze them. Moses goes up on a mountain and he would not take no for an answer from God or from anyone. These are, of course, true visionaries. Today we do have history behind us. And we could see what withstood and what didn't withstand. And still, we worship the immediate and the now, the here and now. How do you explain that? So it goes back to because we are all a little meshugah. That's the bottom line. We all are a little strange people, which means we are blinded. And this moment of seduction blinds you completely from every other moment. You see it all the time. You get consumed with something. It doesn't make a difference whether it made sense. It doesn't make sense. It makes no difference even if in your mind you can imagine that tomorrow you won't feel this being so consumed. Now you're consumed, everything else is forgotten. And people make the worst mistakes in such moments. And even their best friends can't stop them. And you see it again and again and again. I've seen it so many times that it becomes a study itself in nature, what that means. You have to say that the curtain is so dense that when it closes on you, and you're in that little cubicle with your own obsessions and with your own desires, everything becomes biased, everything becomes blind. It's like literally a person that became insane for a moment. So temporary insanity. And then the next day comes, and the person sees the damage was done. So you'd think, okay, never again. It's not the case. Why? Because the curtain comes down again. I've seen this. I remember a person who I met who was in the hospital, and the doctors given up hope. So of course at those moments, the curtain opens up. And you suddenly realize. And he said to me, he's committed. You know, he did a lot of things that he has a lot to repent for. Let's put it this way. But I know him for many years. And he said, that's it, if God grants me life, I promise I will never be this way, that way, that way, that way. I didn't want to smile, the man was about to die. But I did smile inside. I said, yeah, I wish that were true. But you know something? God gave him another chance. And you know what? He went right back to where he started. This is a person on a deathbed. And I mention it to him from time to time. And still, he smiles, you know, because he came out of it. I can give you an example from my own life, even though I can't say it to that extreme. I don't think I'm that insane. But we all have our moments. I remember when I sat Shiva with my family for my father. A little more than 3 years ago. You sit Shiva for 7 days, maybe with a break of Shabbos, but it's basically 7 days. And you stay home. You stay in the home all day with my parents' home, and you have a whiz of visitors. You don't know whether you're coming or going. Besides the loss and the shock and the whole disorientation, people keep coming and coming and coming. So you're like you're just overwhelmed. Like all your circuits are overwhelmed. Which you see the beauty, of course, of Shiva, because in the way it lifts you, it doesn't allow you to just wallow in your own misery or sadness. And it was beautiful to see. I don't even remember what people told me. It wasn't really relevant. It just was like a whole. And you turn, it's like life for a moment, you have a whole different perspective on life. You start to see the things that you're so consumed with really are insignificant. That's what happens when you experience death in your family. I mean, no one should know of this. Those that do know, you know what I'm talking about. And then I remember the day, in Jewish tradition, after you stand up from Shiva for that morning, you take a walk around the block. It's in a way like to get rid of the bad spirits, but it has a bigger impact. I remember walking around the block, not that I didn't see the light of day before, but it was like literally entering into a new world. Because for 6 days, 7 days that I was in this so-called cocoon, it was like you saw truth, you see truth. You see a person who you loved, who was part of the foundations of your life. You see that life dissipate, the life leave, the soul leave the body. It's impossible to describe. So everything in life becomes very almost meaningless. And I remember walking, I remember even thinking to myself, I said, is this going to last? Will I continue to see that? In a way I wanted it to last, not the pain of it, but the truth of it. It was the most truest thing you see. And of course it didn't last. And I think about it very often, because here I see it in front of my eyes, that I cannot recreate it even if I want to. I remember it, I could write about it, I could describe it, but I can't experience it. And I don't want to experience it, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to experience truth in that fashion, but truth I want to experience. And I could say, I'm a person I try to pursue that avenue. In a positive way, it's similar when someone is born. Because like in a way, the door closes and opens twice in our lives. When the womb opens and delivers a child, the door from another universe opens up and delivers a life from there. And then the door closes. So the magic of birth is very similar. I'm not a woman, so I never gave birth. But people who've given birth will tell you that. And then the door opens one more time to take back that life. And that's when you open the ground and you put a body back into the earth. Of course, the first one is a much sweeter moment of truth. But they're both moments of truth. I only say it for the contrast to understand that even if I think you're a truthful person, the fact is all our greatest truths are still somewhat overshadowed by what the Kabbalists call this world as being Alma de Shikra, a world that lies. That doesn't mean everyone's lying all the time. It means that everyone can lie all the time and get away with it. It means that truth, which should dominate, which means in a world of truth, nothing that's untrue should be able to survive. Like, for example, the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur is such a place of truth that one blemish of a high priest causes the priest to die in that room. A real place of truth is like a pure environment that no contamination will be tolerated. So with all the truth and sincerity we have, it doesn't come to what we call Elam HaEmes, the world of true truth. What we try to do, and the purpose of our lives, is to take this so-called world of deception and try to infiltrate, try to pierce that armor and bring some glimmers of truth into the world. And then, with God's help, slowly that truth begins to expand and we can transform this universe. But it's still always an uphill battle. So at Sinai, this door opened up in a very broad way and it connected these two worlds. But then the door closed. And what happened? The Jews began to build a golden calf. The same bizarre paradox. They just saw the truth. They just connected to God. And 39 days later, they have an ultimate betrayal. They built a golden calf. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. What sin could have been worse? It was the second commandment. I am your God. Do not build false gods. There they go. They build a false god. Just to show you, this was an enlightened generation. They saw revelations. They had no excuse. I mean, the commentaries explain all the reasoning, but the bottom line was that once the curtain closed, they thought heaven was lost. They thought Moses was lost. So they're going to create a new Moses. That's one of the explanations. Bottom line, they had a loss of faith, a blind spot. And it may have been with good intentions. So when we think about our own lives, I'm going to discuss it more on a personal note, as we discussed earlier. As I said, there's no one here that's immune from some loss in your life. As I said, a lost dream, a broken promise, etc., etc. Now we're talking after the fact. We're not talking about a situation. I'm going to have to qualify this. If it's a situation where you think you can regain that dream or reclaim that love, then by all means, go for it. I would advise to find an objective person to help along to see that you're not just fantasizing, and that it's realistic, and that there's some real dream or some real person waiting for you. But by all means, if a person has that confidence, go for it. But let's just say for a moment a situation where time has passed and it's clear that you're not going to regain that magic, at least not in that fashion. So what has it done to you? In most cases, it usually weakens you, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, to acknowledge that it's weakened you. Even though our pride would tell us, hey, I don't want anyone to know I was weakened by it, I especially don't want to know that other person should know that, because in a sense it's like they won and I lost. But in our own hearts, when you speak to yourself, or you speak to God, or you speak to a friend, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that it has weakened. It's weakened your resolve, it's weakened your confidence, because as I mentioned earlier, you sometimes start blaming yourself. Maybe I did something wrong. And maybe you did. You always walk in the right time. I didn't say you did anything wrong. I don't want to hear that.
But I know from blaming myself.
Right.
Don't sit in
Catherine
the
always
corner.
walks in at the right moment. Do you wait at the door to...
No, God keeps me there.
Okay. So the first thing is this. Even if all this is true, that you did something wrong, and there's many reasons to blame yourself, there's a very critical rule called the Torah psychology. And remember this the rest of your lives. It can save your life. I'm not saying that lightly. And that is, you have to distinguish between a negative experience and its impact on your life. Specifically, if something demoralizes you, demoralization is always a force, what the Kabbalists call, from the world of Klippa, from the world of evil. So even if you did the worst thing possible, there are things to be done. There's a thing called regret, there's a thing called repentance, tshuva. But demoralization is the side effect of the spiritual infection that it wants to take hold of your life. It found something to grab onto. You did something wrong, it will now demoralize you. And that voice of demoralization is much, much worse than the original sin, always. Because it doesn't give you the strength to do anything about it. Let's say you hurt somebody, you truly hurt somebody. Whether you acknowledge it, not acknowledge it, I'm not getting into that right now. But you hurt somebody, objectively you hurt somebody. And you become aware of it. If you're not aware of it, that's another problem. Then you're just living in your own delusions, which will usually cause you to hurt more people. So what usually happens when a person becomes aware? They get demoralized. They say, how could I have done that? And what could I do to turn the clock back? I wish I could change what I did. Now those feelings, per se, some of them are fine, but the demoralization part, where it starts breaking you down, weakening you, it paralyzes you. That's how you know it's demoralizing. If it motivates you, and you say, I'm going to do something about this, I'm going to, by hook or by crook, I'm going to find a way to repair this. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean the other person will want to even listen to you. But by hook or by crook means you find friends, you find ways, you work at it. There are people that have been hurt, and then the person dies. What do you do then? You can't even ask them for forgiveness. Even there, the Torah has methods how a person can repair. Nothing is impossible. But the demoralization is what destroys us. It's similar to the concept in a different context, where you say that silence is worse than the rape. It's one thing when a crime is perpetrated. It's another when you don't acknowledge it. Which means then that you'll never fix it. That's why you'll find in situations of real abuse, the silence, the invalidation that you can't even cry, you can't complain. Nothing happened. is much, much worse than the original crime. Because the original crime was a crime, and now human nature should demand and should expect to cry out. You're not allowed to cry, then you can't trust. Look at children who've been seriously abused in their homes, and then silence took over. You know what happens? They don't trust themselves. Because they've been told you're not supposed to cry, nothing happened. So later in life, when something happens, they're not sure. Is my reaction right? Am I wrong? They lose their so-called, what's the word for it? Barometer. That healthy barometer that every healthy human being deserves of knowing what's right and what's wrong. To some of you here, it may sound strange and weird, but anyone aware of this in your own life or friends, you know this is not that strange. It's a reality. If it's strange to you, it's a good sign. It means your barometer is healthy. Or maybe just that you're playing naive. That's another option. I'm not going to get into that. One of the two. But the fact is, that's what happens. Because children are very fragile, impressionable, and they have a natural sense of what's dangerous, what's not. But when you start challenging that sense, then they start questioning themselves, which is the worst thing that adults can do to children. Much worse than any crime. Because then they don't have the tools to know, is this dangerous or not dangerous? That's why you find people who keep continuously getting themselves into abusive situations. Like it's just, why would anyone look for an abusive relationship? Why would anyone always find the wrong person, as they say? No, how would anyone, we all, self-preservation is the cardinal rule of existence. Why would anyone do something that is going to be hurtful? What really happens is because you don't even know what's right and what's wrong. I know people, and I've seen this. When they're loved, and someone cares about them, they always expect that some moment later they're going to be slapped, they're going to be hurt. There are people like that. Because that's the pattern of their childhood. That they were loved, and then they were hurt by the people that love them. And they no longer can distinguish between love and hurt. They sometimes think love means that you're going to be hurt in the process. As I said, a healthy person can't imagine that. But someone that has, their boundaries have been so-called, compromised. There's another word I want to say, not betrayed. Have been violated. Right? Violated? That's a strong word, yes. Or even violated is enough. Yeah. It creates a distortion, and it takes a lot. That's why I think, for instance, one of the beautiful ideas in Torah where it says this is right, this is wrong, even though I know in the world that we live, moral relativistic world, people don't like to hear that. For people who've lost their so-called barometer, it's the most important thing to hear. This is right and this is wrong, period. This isn't relative. There's nothing wrong with saying some things are wrong and some things are right. Especially for children or people who've so-called lost their compass. So the demoralization is the enemy. That's the thing I wanted you to remember. Which means the following. That if you can soberly look at your past, the first thing is you have to get rid of the demoralization. Without that, it's going to be very, very difficult to go anywhere. You have to separate. This is what happened. Whatever reason, it may have been my fault, it may not have been my fault, you may never know even, but you can't allow it to weaken your tools, because then you can't proceed. The second thing, which is on the positive note, is you have to always know that no matter what happens to you, your soul always remains intact. This is the second thing to remember. That your soul can never truly be damaged. What I mean by that is the arteries that connect the soul to your life can be severed, can be blocked, can be clogged, but never the soul itself. As a matter of fact, the Kabbalists say there are 5 dimensions to the soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Nefesh is like the biological life that the soul gives us. Ruach, spirit, is the emotional life of our soul. Neshama is the intellectual life. Chaya is the transcendental life. And Yechida is like the essence of the soul, almost the essence of the soul, meaning the place that's just everything is one unity, Yechida, oneness, where you reach oneness, like where you feel you completely belong. So the Zohar says an expression. The Torah says the words nefesh kisechta. When a nefesh, a soul, will sin. And the Zohar is shocked by Zohar asks a very is very puzzled by the statement. Nefesh kisach sechta teva. Teva is in Aramaic. How is that possible? Impossible. How could a nefesh, a soul of God, sin? So the Zohar, by its question, is basically challenging the entire premise. You can say the nefesh's connection to the body, or the effect of this material world on the nefesh, caused it to sin. But the nefesh itself could never sin. And the Zohar gives its explanation. That's just the nefesh level. That's the lowest level. Even the biological part of the soul, essentially can never really be contaminated by sin. How much more so the other levels? When you talk about Yechida, Yechida says is never manifest. All the wounds that we will endure in life, every lost dream, every broken promise, never affects those parts of the soul. So then why are we so hurt? Why are we so disturbed? Why are we so destroyed by these experiences? Because you're not living on that level. That's the obvious reason. You're living in the here and now. For you, success is what you have right now. You want your candy. Someone takes it away. You're disturbed. Obviously, I mean candy not just in the physical sense, metaphorically. You want something, you don't get it, it hurts you. So the first thing is not to allow the demoralization to settle in. And the second thing is you have to dig deeper and reconnect to that part of your soul. So terrible things have happened to people in life, collectively and individually. Collectively, as I said earlier, the Jewish people went through plenty. I mean, you talk about a Holocaust survivor, and there are so many. They basically saw their entire families wiped out. Boys, girls, no one left. Not their father and mother, not their brothers and sisters. Many even lived with the guilt that they survived, which, by the way, is an expression of the demoralization. Instead of saying, well, God wanted you to survive, maybe to rebuild. I'm not judging anyone in that position, they're sacred. But that's what they did. Many of them rebuilt. That's the miracle. With all that they went through, you could have said they should have given up on life. Just wither away and die. Most did not. Are there some? Yes, there are some. My father was a publisher of the Algemeine, which I now have the honor to be the publisher of. He had a writer called Katzetnik, who was probably the most raw and graphic writer about the Holocaust. This man was such a tortured soul. I remember visiting him with my father. My father used to tell me about him. He wrote volumes. When you read, you will not believe the word. It's not some packaged book you're going to sleep with at night. Trust me. If you read, it's completely, unbelievably raw. He would write entire books. I saw this with my own eyes. And we would come to get from him, let's say, a manuscript or an article, and in front of our eyes, he would take the book and throw it into the fireplace, and it burned up completely. That's how tortured a man he was. He was a brilliant writer. He didn't do this for some drama. A movie should be made out of it. He did it, he was tortured. He couldn't bring himself to publish his own words. He had to write it, and then he burned it. I don't know how many pages were burned. And he was a genius writer, excellent writer, unbelievable writer. No, again, we don't go into the hearts and souls. Such dark places are very difficult for us to imagine. To us it makes sense. I wish I could have saved it, get a good publishing deal, and make a few $1 million. It's not something he really cared about. He probably gave him a few $1 million. He probably also would have burned it if it made money, his books. This is a tortured soul. This is one of the darkest. So you see this. Just meet any Holocaust survivor, and you see the story. So they're in a class of their own. But what you can learn from them is many of them have built families. With all the anguish, and you never forget those nightmares. I don't forget my father's death, but I'm not living with it like it was the moment when it happened. And it was a natural death, relatively speaking, comparatively speaking. These are people that don't forget. And yet they rebuilt it. The only answer is because another dimension of their soul emerged, maybe against their will even, and it took over. They knew that they had to continue. Maybe it was the determination to not let the name of their family disappear with them. That can be the power. That accesses a very deep part of the soul when you have such determination. Maybe it was something that's not logical. It's fine to say that as well. You don't even have to explain it. The proof is in the pudding. You look at the results. Who really cares what the analysis of it is? It's not a scientific thing. But one thing is for sure, that there is such resilience, there is such power. Now, thank God we don't have to be tested like that. So our tests go down to smaller level, our own personal dreams that may have been shattered. And what will always happen is it will demoralize you, which usually weakens you, leading to resignation, leading to not willing or too afraid to fail again. That means you just write off a part of yourself. You'll never love that way again. I'm never going to meet someone like that again. Giving up hope on others, stopping to trust, finding other outlets to distract yourself. And the second thing is that the demoralization is that side of it, is that you don't dig and discover that you have much more in you than you think you have. So is heaven lost? The answer is no, it's not lost. But we think it's lost. And that's the disaster, that you think it's lost. Imagine you know, and I've seen this many times in my life. I see people, they have unbelievable strengths, but they don't see it. You want to shake them, you want to wring their neck. I never did that, but you want to shake them and like say, you have everything you need inside of you. You have it sitting right there. It's like a treasure right near you, but you're refusing to look. So there are gimmicks, there are methods. I don't say gimmicks may not be the right word. There are methods to help someone, but ultimately, push comes to shove, you can only help someone that's ready to help themselves a little. They do a little, like the Talmud says, give me a little finger and I'll give you the rest. But if they don't even give a little finger, it's very, very difficult. I mean, then you need sometimes a miracle. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to hit rock bottom. That's the other extreme. And then survival comes into play, etc., etc. So, we all have, everyone here has strengths far beyond the ones you know. So as we stand right here after Sinai, the day after the anniversary, 3,320 years ago, there were people then also thought heaven was lost. And they tried to create their own idol, their own golden calf. Many of us replaced the dreams, the pure innocence, the dreams that came when we were innocent. We replaced it with all kinds of other obsessions. Sometimes they're addictions as well. You know, anything just to arouse some passion. That's a big force for people who need passion in their lives. So passion per se is a very healthy thing. But if it doesn't come to you in healthy ways, some people do anything for passion. You know, they have today proven that monkeys or other animals, when they get addicted to a drug, they press this button, they will do it to the point that they will kill themselves. Because once they get the high, they are so desperate for the high, even if they know what it will do to them, they're ready to die because they're so addicted to the high. So everyone deserves to be high in a healthy way. Everyone deserves passion, everyone deserves love. And you have to know that you deserve it, and you have to know that nothing can really take it away from you. Only you can do it to yourself. So even in the worst scenario, that you made real mistakes in your past, I'll get to the other scenarios in a moment. Even that scenario, that you're the one that really undermined your own relationship or that dream or whatever it was. You made the mistake. Even there, demoralization and the potential of your soul are not necessary. Rather, demoralization should not control you, and the potential of your soul should. Now, what about instances where it wasn't you? So first of all, it's an interesting phenomenon I've discovered, that often people who even know that someone else is to blame and something didn't work, they often will still somewhat blame themselves. It's a strange thing. Maybe it gives people a sense of control. I don't know if the word is control, a sense of understanding. Because let's say you loved someone dearly and they professed love to you, and you decided to live happily ever after, and you made commitments and so on and so forth. And at the time, you and the person you loved thought that this would never change. People have this. Then something happens. And let's say in this instance, it was the other person suddenly backed out. They decided, whatever the reason is. It's a very intolerable thing to have when you feel such love. As a matter of fact, some people like to pull out before the other person pulls out, so we all leave little back doors. So you never, you're always the first one to leave. But in a case where the other person left first, what does it leave you? It leaves you demoralized. And above all, you start to question why. You start thinking about every step of the way. What did I do wrong? That this thing, I should have said this, I should have said that. Even when you know the other person was the one, that you did not do anything, that you were there, you would have been committed, and that's how you felt, and you didn't change your commitment. Even then, because it gives us some sense of, I guess, rationale of what happened, if we can blame ourselves a little. Because if not, it just remains a mystery, which is much worse. It's like an unknown. Why would it have happened? What happened? Where'd the guy or the girl go? So you see, it always affects how you look at yourself. That's the difficulty, the challenge, is that you have to can't allow that to happen. For a short period of time, it will happen. That's something that we all go through. There's a period where a person is going to be down, and that's it. You can't really change that. The question, of course, is long term, when time passes. So, to say the concept of a shattered dream, the truth is, from a Torah point of view, no dream is really shattered. It's we that become shattered, and we that create the illusion that it's totally shattered. Because within everything that's broken, there's something else that can be built. And that comes down to your own faith, your confidence, and ultimately the resilience and the power of your soul. You want to ask something, Lloyd?
Yes. Doesn't Torah teach that, two things? Doesn't Torah teach that you have to assume full responsibility for everything that takes place in your life? And you shouldn't blame others?
Okay, and the second?
The second is, it's one thing to say when you're demoralized, don't get demoralized, prevent it from happening, but when you are demoralized already, how does the Torah teach to get out of that place once you're already there?
I'll just repeat the question for those that may not have heard it. Our good friend Lloyd here has asked two questions. One, does the Torah not teach that we are always responsible for things that happen to us and we shouldn't be blaming others? And two, what are methods to get out of that demoralized place? Right? Regarding question number one, it's a good question, and but it has to be qualified. It's not so black and white. Are the Jews supposed to blame themselves for being killed by the Nazis? For 6 million Nazis? You think the Torah advocates that? No. Absolutely not. They were criminals, worse than criminals, beasts, who perpetrated an unprecedented genocide. Did the Jews personally have their own flaws that God maybe wanted to punish them? First of all, that's between them and God. Who appointed the Nazis to get in between here? Secondly, to blame yourself, that's a completely non-Torah concept. Or else you basically get rid of all reward and punishment. Then nobody can be punished for anything they did, because you can blame yourself. Everything that happened to me was my fault. So let me qualify what the statement means. Use Maimonides actually says it well. He says in the beginning of the laws of fasting, about why we fast, why we have fast days. So he says a very powerful statement, that when something happens to you in life, when a calamity strikes an individual or a group, he says it is cruel and insensitive to say that this calamity was an accident. It just happened, random occurrence. That is why you have to take it to heart and learn lessons from it and look into your own actions, what you could do to repair. The key thing to remember is this, that when a calamity strikes, yes, when the Nazis killed 6 million Jews, from the Maimonides perspective, a Torah perspective, we have to look into our hearts what we can do to be better people, because it did happen to us. But that's a big far cry from saying that we're to blame. That's not what Maimonides says. Maimonides says you never look at things as just random. The blame is flatly put right on where it belongs, the criminals. But you still have to take a lesson from it. When a person, as a matter of fact, Maimonides writes a similar thing when a person dies. Let's say a father or mother, God forbid, a family member. So he says a person has to look at themselves, and there clearly it's not to blame. An elder parent passed away. It's not a question of blame, but since it happened to you, it's a moment of reflection. Look at your life. So it's not about blame. That's not the word. The word is not to ignore important events in your life, including calamities. So I would say from the 6 million Jews that were killed, what is the lesson to us? That we should double and triple our efforts to be stronger Jews, to so-called replace what was taken, to make those souls who were so ripped away from this world proud. That is absolutely a legitimate approach. But to start saying the Jews were not observant enough, or they weren't religious enough, that's why it happened. God forbid. You see the distinction? On a personal level, the same is true. In a given situation, the fact is you may be to blame. What I just said doesn't mean you're never to blame. It's possible that you actually did something wrong. So that's called being accountable. But even when you didn't do anything wrong, you still have to look at a lesson from it. That's why I said earlier that even if you didn't do anything, you still have to do something about it to get out of this place. Which leads me to your second question, which I was leading up to regardless. Demoralization is, as I said, a big enemy. If demoralization lasts too long, there's serious problems. If anybody is demoralized by any experience for longer than, let's say, a few days, or let's say a few weeks maximum, then there means that person usually suffering from some type of inherent insecurity. If it lasts a certain period of time during the moment when you were broken or hurt, I would say, even though it's still something we shouldn't succumb to, but it's part of the process of healing. But if it lasts longer, then an evil force has taken over, a negative force, a negative energy. The solutions usually to that often come not from ourselves, because we ourselves can't just. If you're demoralized, you don't have the tools to counter that. It's like you are your own worst enemy. Or the words of the Talmud, "Ein chavish mater es atzmei," meaning someone who's in fetters cannot unfetter themselves. When you're tied up, you can't untie yourself, because the hands you have that are supposed to help you untie yourself are also tied up. And this is true psychologically as well. A person in a pit can't live themselves out. So the best and healthiest thing in a situation like that is friends, mentors, anyone that you can trust, that you build connections with, that can help you with some objectivity, with shedding some light. And of course it's up to you to listen, which is of course a great challenge number 2. Because then people say, no one understands me, and that's it, and that's it. And you're convinced, and you're right about your being demoralized. In a strange way, arrogance doesn't always take the shape of being pompous and overconfident. Arrogance can also take the shape of complete demoralization. You're convinced that you're worthless. Who are you to say you're worthless? That's a very vain statement. God says you're not. Your soul says you're not. And you decided you are. Your friends tell you you're not. Your mentor tells you. So there, with the little finger that's required is to allow others in. What I would advise to everyone is you build a mentor relationship before demoralization strikes. Because after it strikes, it's going to be very difficult. You're only going to want mentors that affirm your position. So I once asked somebody about a mentor. She says, "Yeah, my mentor agrees with everything I say." So it's like you realize the problem with that, right? So I said, "He agrees with you before you said it or after you said it?" He says, "After I explain it to him, he understands." So in other words, a mentor basically that agrees with everything. Now I understand a mentor that's sensitive to everything about you, but if he agrees with everything, he or she agrees with everything, then usually there's a problem, especially if your life isn't working. So maybe it's time to get another mentor. That's what I told this person. I said, it's because it's very nice. He agrees with everything you say, but are you happy? No. So then let's figure out by process of elimination, what's wrong here? You're right, your mentor is right, you're both right, and your life isn't working. So what else can be, what's mysterious factor, X factor is missing? Now this person was not able to hear at that time, but hopefully by now that person can hear this. But this is part of the games we play with ourselves. Not intentionally, mind you. It was too difficult, and sometimes we don't want to fail. So it's always good to just put it that way and say it's some mystery. Which is what many times when people come to me and they say, "I think I have an ayin hara placed on me, an evil eye. Someone put a curse on me, a witch." And I say, "Why do you think that?" Because everything I'm doing doesn't work. I've heard this many, many times. Okay, so let's discuss what you're doing. No, I already went over this. So what are you coming to me? Like, I have to trust that you tried everything. I mean, I don't say it in those words, but I say maybe you didn't try everything. They're convinced they tried everything. I said, if you're convinced you tried everything, and all the objective people around you are convinced they tried everything, I don't know if I can help you, because I may not agree. That's the bottom line. It's very rare that it's because of a curse or an evil eye. Let's put it this way. From my experience, from my knowledge, from what it says in the books, it's very, very, very rare. It's only possible to go there, and only true Kabbalists will go there when they objectively have seen that everything else was eliminated. In most cases, most people do not want to look at everything, because they don't want to look that they have to do something differently. It may be too difficult. It seems simpler. I'll just pay for some kameya or some evil eye warder, whatever they're called. They ward off evil eyes. Some type of radar detector or whatever. And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, because I know people, maybe some in this room, that may feel that way. And I'm not trying to dismiss anyone, but the bottom line, let's call a spade a spade. It's much more likely that you're not seeing everything than to just say that it's some curse from heaven or from someone. And besides the point, which is maybe the most important point of all, as they say, an ayin hara only affects those that believe in it. That also says in the books. What does that say? That says a person may be a witch, but if they affect you, it means you're vulnerable, it means you open yourself up. So maybe your job is to close yourself and not have to ward off, just create a vulnerability. Maybe you have to not allow it to demoralize you and access your deeper part of your soul. So I would say the best method, so-called, to counter demoralization is usually good friends that can kick you in the pants, and that you welcome that, meaning you trust them, and develop that before, so-called, the storm strikes. There are other methods as well. If you look in Tanya in the chapters 26, 27, it talks a lot about the demoralization aspect. It comes down to also meditation on your soul. Because if you meditate that your soul cannot be hurt by anything, and that you need to reach deeper into it, meditations of that nature tend to strengthen you. It's like an exercise. You have to access the deeper strings that we have. It may not be easy to do on your own. That's why I said it's good to have friends, sometimes studying, prayer, good deeds, which shouldn't be dismissed. As the final thing I want to say, that through studying Torah, through doing through prayer, through doing an act of charity, virtue, these things also tend to counter negative influences. Because even if other things are so-called weakening, diminishing your spirit, or demoralizing you, but then you have forces in your life that you can be proud of. You've helped somebody. You've studied something positive. So it may not have a direct impact on the demoralization, but it does tend to fill your spirit with something positive. It's like you're not just thinking negative things all day. You have something else to do. The more you fill yourself with good light, in a sense it starts dispelling bad light. Because remember, a person can't concentrate on two things at once. So the fact that you get, let's say, committed, and you can't get out of it, you're stuck in helping other people, volunteering, or charity, acts of charity, or whatever it may be, those actions tend to lead you to good places. So in a so-called backdoor approach, you're eliminating other stuff from within you. And that also works. I'm middle of speaking. I'll take all questions at the end, if you don't mind. You tell me, excuse me? What does that mean? I'm not disturbing anyone, am I?
I was called to sleep by a power that I couldn't describe.
Okay. So your power will have to discuss that with my power. I'll take your question in a moment, Barry. Don't worry, I'll take your question. So I saw both your hands up. I'll take. Patience. Patience is also a virtue.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just forget it. Remember when our teachers used to say, when you forget the question,
It wasn't so important.
yeah, or you could answer it yourself. So to sum up, basically, is heaven lost? The answer is no. The truth is, the answer is yes and no. Yes, if you allow it to be lost. But no, in essence, it's never lost. Because the permanence of heaven, the permanence of faith, the permanence of truth outlasts each of us and all our doubts and all our questions. The question is whether you can connect to the permanent elements of that truth, or you're going to connect and worship the impermanent things in life. That's our choice. So if you connect to the impermanent, then the permanent will disappear, or will be concealed is the better word. And that's our choice. And there are methods. Obviously, method one of all is to be in touch with and connect with people that believe this. If you're going to hang around with people that don't, they just will reinforce all the reasons why you should be demoralized. Demoralized people make other people demoralized. Remember, it's contagious. It has a viral effect. And the same is true the other way around. People who are, what's the opposite of demoralize? Moralize? No, that's not a good word.
In line.
Energize. Energize. I remember sitting, first time I ever sat at a meeting, and I'm not a meeting type of guy, but I remember when I was younger, they said there's going to be an office meeting, a committee meeting. So I went to a meeting. And I remember after the meeting, I asked one of the experienced people who ran the meeting, like, what was this exactly? So they said, listen, remember this lesson in life. A meeting can only do two things. Either it empowers you or it drains you. So after the meeting, just ask yourself, if you're drained, the meeting was a waste of time. And you know the people are going nowhere. If it empowers you, it was worthwhile. And the second thing is, he said, remember follow-up. What happens after the meeting? The follow-up steps. And I've always learned that to be really, as I've run my own meetings since, and been part of different meetings, I always look at that and I say at the end of the meeting, did it drain or did it not? Did it empower or not? And that's the same thing with friends and people around us. Either you're energized or either you're empowered or you're disempowered. You're either energized or you're demoralized. Is there a neutral thing? Probably not, because the fact is the hour or two that you spent with the person, well, what happened? I mean, it's either dead weight or it lifts you. So, may God bless us all to find those type of circle of friends. I found that many of you, and maybe you don't even know that. Maybe it's my empowering you that empowers you in return, or maybe the other way around. We can never know. But so I thank you, and I say thank you to people who've been into the class here over 20 years ago. Mickey Ben Kiki, Jeff, Barry's been a long time, Mark even. So on one hand, I point them out because I'm proud of the fact, but on the other hand, I was just thinking, and I say this with all due respect, people may study you and say, is this what I'm going to look like in 20 years from now? You know, is that the impact that Rabbi Jacobson had?
It's okay, right?
I'm just kidding. I understand. No, actually, I'm very proud to say that, yes, these are good specimens, right? Graduates, alumni.
Sure.
So it's an honor to be with you. And many that are out there in cyberspace, as we've announced, that today you can see this class in the comfort of your bubble bath, or cuddled up under a blanket, or hanging from a what are they called? Exercise bars, whatever it is. You can never know, right? So far I can't see you, even though you can see me, but the day will come. So, with that being said, I will take now a question or two.
Okay.
Barry.
The question I have that,
No, you can leave it on.
talking about these situations, these are everyday situations, the crisis of the age, which I say over 50% of the population in America, even more women, is trauma, where the body is literally in a state of shock, where your mind can't even go because there's a medical problem. We've got hundreds of thousands of young men coming back from Iraq that are beyond just find a friend. I mean, so when you are in a situation like that,
Yeah.
what can you do?
That's an excellent question. Obviously, I was talking about, I'll just repeat the question that Barry's asking. This is the powers from above said you should ask? Really? So tell them it's a good question. Well, I will say the following. I will repeat the question. The question that Barry just asked was that I was discussing, obviously, not extreme situations. What about extreme trauma? Let's say people coming back from war, Iraq war or other wars, or other extreme forms of trauma, where there is profound levels of demoralization and other impact on a person.
Well, it's a bodily...
Even a bodily impact. Okay. No, I understand perfectly. I should add that also is true to certain forms of abuse. Child abuse rape, incest, or so on, another deep or physical beating of a child consistently. I don't want to even mention these things, but they exist. These also tend to become very bodily, and the body carries the messages, and the body carries the memories. So I was specifically not addressing that type of situation, which maybe I should have, but because I was talking about more things that are, I would say, that most of us probably encounter more often. But since you're asking, I would say there's no question. There's a thing called, once it goes over from the psychological to the clinical, whether it's a clinical depression or clinical demoralization, and then you may be talking about things that are equivalent to some people who may be born with chemical imbalances, or later assume that in life. So then you're dealing with not just something you're going to just change your mindset and just believe in God and in your soul. Though I believe that everything I said here today, that people who are really in a very severe trauma definitely need access to their soul as well. But there they may need a lot more help than just the meditation. It may require medication. It definitely will require a medical intervention like therapy, people who are experts in dealing with trauma. But I have to say, based on the principles I stated tonight, there's no person on earth that soul is ever destroyed. So even if there's severe trauma to the point that the body is dramatically impacted, almost in irreversible ways, the soul remains intact. I'll use an example. What about a situation you didn't mention? Someone experiences an accident in their lives, a physical accident, that a part of their body gets severed, God forbid. And that is a major change in a person's life. That's irreversible, physically. Blindness, deafness, I don't want to go into every other organ that can be damaged. So obviously, there's some things that they will not be able to change. But we have to believe, that for everything that is taken away, something else is given. That's the power of the soul. That's why some people who are blind may have sensitivities in areas that others don't. This by no means is a blessing. We'd rather it wouldn't be that way. Let them be like mediocre in all faculties, rather than lacking one and being excellent in another. But we're talking after the fact. We have to believe that for everything taken from a person, there's something that can be given back, that is given to them in return. And that, I think, is a very critical element that I would encourage anyone that is dealing with post-traumatic syndrome or other serious trauma to incorporate in the psychological intervention. Because I find sometimes either too much medication is used, or many of the healers don't really believe in the resilience of the soul. That's also true. Like you're dealing with special children, for instance. The word special children is not a euphemism. In Judaism, special children means they have special strengths. Now you need a particularly soulful person, sensitive person, to take care of a child like that. Because if they're not that way, if they don't believe in the child's not going to learn to believe in itself. So this is a whole other discussion that goes into, I would say, more extreme situations. But the principles I've said here still stand, it's just that you need additional interventions based on the circumstance, case by case. But I think, believing in God and believing and having faith means that sometimes the mysterious journey that people go on, even ones that seem completely incomprehensible, senseless, have some form of meaning, and we have the ability and strength to counter it or to find other beauty that comes out of it. And I can give examples, but suffice for now. Well, God should bless us all. We should not know of such trauma, and the trauma we've had already in our lives should be enough to wake us up and not allow demoralization to creep in. And remember that your soul has infinite amount of potential, far beyond that you can ever imagine. I want to say this class is dedicated to us talking about Refuah Shlema to Devorah Leah Bat Michal, whose birthday was also yesterday. So happy birthday to her. May she have a complete Refuah Shlema and overcome her challenges, and the same with everyone here or anywhere, online, offline, wherever they may be. And we should have a very blessed week and a blessed year and a blessed forever. And until next Wednesday night, we sign off. Good night, everybody.